Now that we've covered the American perspective on these tariffs and trade war, now we're going to have to look at the Chinese perspective. So, as like we stated in the last video, we have seen an escalation in Chinese tariffs in June, last August, and last September, and they've been really targeting rural America. So the most imports from America to China come from aircrafts, they come from soybeans, they come from car dealerships, and they also come from electronic circuits. 12.4 roughly $1 billion is soybeans, and this number comes from the St. Louis Fed in Q3 2018. So we look at the targeted tariffs of regards to rural America. This is actually a pretty important play by the Chinese and how they enact their tariffs. They attack rural America because rural America was one of the main supporters of Donald Trump in the 2016 election victory. Without rural America, he wouldn't have won. And so now that China is targeting rural America and their unemployment is escalating, they have to deal with this opioid crisis, which has a tendency to deal with employment and manufacturing jobs that have been lost to China. China's increasing pressure on rural America has really been felt with regards to the communities out there, and this target will reflect how the Chinese do not want Trump to win the 2020 election just because of all the tariffs that he's enacting, and the Chinese are probably sick of it by now. So in order to get Trump out of office, they're going to hit his base in rural America, hoping they don't go out and vote for him because of how these tariffs have impacted them. And then once the new administration gets in, they can then later enact a détente or a trade policy without these tariffs. And President Xi, Xi, Xi is it pronounced? He is pretty much there for life. So he does not need to worry about re-election just from how the Communist Party is structured. And so China does have that main thing going for them, is the fact that he doesn't have to worry about the election in 2020 or be pressed for a trade deal. He can wait it out. He can keep attacking the American economy, and keep attacking the rural America just so he can get Trump out of office and then renegotiate a trade deal that's best for China. But he does have some internal pressures, which we will get to later. Number two we need to talk about is the keeping of the intellectual property rights for China. Like we said in the last video, the intellectual property rights have been a main focus by America and other countries with regards to operations in China, about how China is able to use the intellectual property. One of their arguments is that it allows them to better understand what's going on with regards to how their businesses operate, and because they're operating in their country, they need to know how they operate. And that really hasn't stopped any direct investment in China. American companies have invested roughly $250 billion in China in 2018, 2017, the last few years, and it continues to remain strong just because of how massive that market is, how massive the middle class is. It's pretty much the size of America, and that economy is growing at like a 7% clip, which we'll get to later, which is good and bad. Hawaii, that's the main telecom company within China. They are a leader in 5G, and as you continue hearing the news, the race to 5G with regards to AT&T, Verizon, maybe Sprint, T-Mobile, Hawaii is the Chinese player, and they have a massive, massive global infrastructure in place. And if the Chinese get to 5G first, that could potentially be a problem for America and the Trump administration, just their credibility with regards to how America's first and the amount of benefits that could come to China just because of the first to 5G, and businesses would want to rush in there to capitalize on this new technology and band spectrum. And so, like I talked about before, President Xi, who is going to be pretty much there past the Donald Trump administration, past the next president, even potentially, the Communist Party is, though, struggling with a few main things. Few main things include this economic growth at roughly 7%. The roughly 7% number, this is the number that has been lowest since in decades and continues to drop. We see that America, their tariffs are working. The businesses aren't investing as much, which gets to our second point. Companies that are leaving China. This diversifies their supply chain. So on CNBC last week, Carl Quintanilla, he went to Vietnam just to talk about the impact of these Chinese and American trade relations. Companies are diversifying their supply chain out of China, decreasing their GDP, and going to countries like Vietnam, where the Vietnam environment business-wise is still very friendly, especially compared to Europe and America, just when it comes to low textile manufacturing and stuff like that. So they're able to go to Vietnam, which isn't that far away either from China, diversify their supply chain long term, and help limit the damage with regards to this Chinese U.S. trade relations. This has long-term implications for the Chinese government because if they stay in Vietnam, that investment's not coming back. It's staying in a competing country. So long-term, it could potentially hit the Chinese economy. Also, another thing is debt. The Chinese debt to GDP has skyrocketed recently. Just the Communist Party keeps pumping stimulus and stimulus into the 7% number, and this 7% number just continues to at least stabilize roughly. It's not great, but they're spending massive amounts, not only here in China, but abroad, just trying to capture that emerging markets, trying to build those relations, and you see that especially with ions and lithium ion batteries, just trying to capture that market. And so they're spending massive amounts of money, and they're actually building ghost cities. A few years back, there's a thing on ABC about how the Chinese are building cities, building massive buildings, just hoping that people would come. The middle class would emerge. They're buying up these apartments and mall space and stuff like that, and we really haven't seen that. And so this 7% GDP might be a little frothy. We do struggle to get reliant, stable numbers, factual numbers out of the Chinese Communist Party. So who knows where exactly it could be, but the forecasted number is 7%, which does provide problems for the Chinese team. So this Chinese group, you guys have the problem of this decrease in GDP, which is with increasing debt, and which could be a problem. Definitely could be a problem long term, especially if you guys default on your debt. President Xi, the communist leader, he has the ability to stay, which does provide some stability for the Chinese economy. But obviously, these tariffs are taking a toll on China. But are they doing effectively in America? I would say so, just with how the Chinese have attacked rural America, and we've obviously seen the direct struggles of the rural American economy, especially with high unemployment and the opioid crisis, which I believe you can directly tie back to these Chinese tariffs and President Xi, his actions. So, thank you, and now we'll try to talk about the business perspective a little bit in the next video.